Chapter 6 of the Boy Scouts in front of Warsaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Felix Johnson. The Boy Scouts in front of Warsaw, or In the Wake of War, by George Durston. Chapter 6. To the Rescue. After this, there was silence. The men slept with snores and grunts, and they moved uneasily on their hard beds, and Ivan slept only at intervals. He was anxious to know whether the conversation had been heard by Warren, but did not dare to communicate with him in any way, although he could hear an occasional sigh as though his friend was suffering pain. Warren was indeed feeling badly from the blow that had nearly broken his skull. Fortunately, the weapon, a piece of iron-shod wood, had glanced and so saved his life. But his head ached worse than he had thought a head could ache, and when he finally came out of the daze of the blow, he slept only in a sort of stupor. He had not heard the conversation that had been listened to so eagerly by Ivan, and was so at least saved that anxiety. Day came, and to Ivan, who was prepared, there were signs of departure. Warren, who still lay silent on his pallet of rags, did not seem to see anything. He did not eat, but accepted a cup of water from the woman's hand. Eleanor clung to him, and the woman did not object. Ivan was afraid to speak to any of them. The day dragged away, and finally, it seemed years, the room grew so dark that Ivan knew that night must be approaching. Soon he would know their fate. It was uncertain, because he knew that at any time in the day they might have decided not to leave their death to the poisoned food, but to shoot them to death before leaving the place. However, Martha commenced the preparation of the meal that was meant for supper, and Ivan noticed that she had made more than usual. A crust of dry bread and a cup of water was given to Warren, and the same fare thrown on the floor beside Ivan, who did not eat it and watched anxiously to see if Warren would taste his, but the boy shook his head. "Never mind," said the woman, slyly looking over to the door where the men were bundling some ragged garments in a big square of cloth. "Never mind. I am sorry for you, my poor boy. Soon those brutes will take us away, but I will leave one good meal for you. I promise you that if they beat me for it, you shall be decently fed for once. And I am a good cook, you shall see." Ivan shivered. Then, as the woman turned to the fire and rattled the pans, he said sharply in English, "Warren, do not eat!" The three turned threateningly as he spoke, but as he made no effort to continue the speech in what to them was an unknown tongue, they once more went about their tasks. As they became interested in the tasks they were doing, Ivan spoke again. "Warren," he said. Warren heard. "Yes?" "Don't try to keep the girls if they start to take them," he said as rapidly as he could talk. "There you go again," said the woman. "What are they up to, do you think?" Michael went over to Warren. "Do you want your head broken again?" he scowled. "You will get it, and you too." He turned to Ivan and shouted threateningly across the room, "It will be your turn if I hear you speak again." Ivan, who had said all he wanted to, nodded and was silent. Soon Michael and Patro picked Ivan up and carried him to the massive bench that stood at one side of the table, and seating him there, tied his legs in a clever fashion so that he was unable to reach the bonds. He was so wedged between the bench and table. The place must once have been a public wine room, and what furniture there was out of the heaviest sort. Warren they lifted and tied in the same manner on the opposite side of the great table. "There," said the woman Martha. "Now you can each see each other and talk as long as you like." She looked at the men and laughed. "Where are you going?" said Ivan in Polish. "Well," said the woman, "I don't mind telling you in the least." "Don't do it," warned Patro. "Why not? They are safe," said the woman. "Won't your bonds hold as long as necessary? You see," she said, turning to Warren, "it will be a day or two, perhaps, before your friends find you. And even then I don't believe you will tell my plans. It will be too late. We are going to tame these nice little girls and make beggars of them. Something useful, you see, instead of letting them grow up in idleness as they would if they stayed with you. We will go to Prague from here, and I will give the little one to my sister. Then we will get out of this accursed country soon as we can, and get away where money comes easy to the poor war refugees. What do you think of that?" She leered close to the boy's face. Everything was ready. The food, poisoned as Ivan knew it to be, stood temptingly between them on the table. It was not an unpleasing meal. To Warren, who had not tasted solid food for 2 days, everything looked inviting. Ivan felt himself shaking with excitement. All was ready. The men unbarred the door, and the woman, with a last sneering gesture at the boys, picked up little Rika, while Michael lifted Eleanor. The child screamed. "Warren, don't let them take me away! Don't let them take me!" she cried over and over. "Be a good girl. We will come for you very soon," said Ivan swiftly as she paused for breath. The child screamed again, and Michael wound a thick muffler across her face. The heavy door closed with a clash. The boys heard a faint cry, and then the great key turned in the lock. They looked at each other. "What does it all mean?" said Warren. He struggled furiously to release his feet, but gave up to sit staring at Ivan. "What does it all mean?" "Well, for one thing," said Ivan, "that food is poisoned." He proceeded to recount to Warren the strange circumstance of the whispered conversation which he had so clearly overheard. "It has saved our lives," said Warren solemnly. "I am starved and would have eaten this stuff sure as nails. Gee, what an escape! Let us work out of these ropes and get out of here. Perhaps we can get those cutthroats before they get away from the city." So closely were they wedged between the benches and table, and so cleverly were their feet tied with rope and pieces of board to wedge them, that it was absolutely an impossibility to release themselves. All through the night they sat there, at intervals renewing their efforts to get free, and with despair growing in their hearts. They began to realize the seriousness of the situation. When Warren's watch told them that morning had come, they found themselves looking wistfully at the food. Its scent was in their famished nostrils. Warren drew a piece of fish toward him. "I wonder if it is all poisoned," he said. With a cry, Ivan reached out and swept the food from the table. "There!" he exclaimed. "I found myself wondering the same thing. If we die, we die. But not that way, my Warren. We will be free yet. Ivanovitch does not die today." But Warren, weakened from his hurts, laid his head down on his arms with a groan. Ivan looked at him pityingly. The loss of his little sister had almost crushed Warren. He who was always the leading spirit, quick and resourceful, was for the moment crushed. Ivan did not speak. He respected the grief of his friend. He knew that soon he would be himself again, planning for success. Late that same afternoon, 3 Boy Scouts sauntered down the dark and twisted alley leading to the river. The section of the city was strange to them, and it was now so wrecked by the recent bombardment that the enemy themselves shunned it. The poor creatures that had once found lodging in those dark holes of want and famine had all fled at the first gunshot, and the boys idled here and there, looking at the marks of the shots and picking up many a queer memento of the battle. Warsaw had fallen, but the spirit of boys is the same all the world over. In their imaginations, even while the smoke of battle still hung over the city, they had planned other and victorious battles. They had already saved Warsaw for a wonderful golden future. As they climbed around, one of them pointed to the broken plaster on the ground. "See," he said, "a scout. 2 of them have been here. There are the marks of the nails in their scout shoes." The other boys looked. Sure enough, they saw distinctly in the marks of the well-known scout shoes, sold even in distant Warsaw. "Let's follow them up," said another boy, leading the way. It was something to do, and they bent to the chase like young hounds on a fresh fox trail. Rather to their disappointment, the tracks did not double or disappear here and there. They led directly down the street. As they followed, a faint cry sounded. The boys stopped, startled. "What's that?" whispered one. The cry was repeated. "Someone in trouble," cried the first boy, hurrying forward. The boy behind took a quick step and caught him by the arm. "Stop," he whispered. "Don't go on. That's not a human voice." Frozen in attitudes of astonishment, the boys stood listening with all their might. "Pshaw!" said the tall boy, Thaddeus, in his rapid Polish. "What think you would cry like that? Spirits?" he laughed. "It might be," said the second lad doggedly. "There are spirits, of course, and when souls are set free in the violence of war, they say they ever return to haunt the scene of their passing." "Well, nobody has passed here," said Thaddeus, "alive or dead. Let's go on." "Wait just a minute," said the second boy. "I tell you there is evil somewhere about here." "The street is dark and crooked enough to hold almost anything," said Thaddeus. "I am not surprised now that my father always ordered me to keep away from these streets leading to the river. They say many and many a poor wretch has been bundled down there and pushed off into the Vistula. She tells no tales, that river." The cry was repeated. It was faint, and there was a note of pain or terror in it that chilled the listeners. Very faint and far away it was, too. "I'm going back," said the second boy. "Go," said Thaddeus scornfully. "Go and give up your scout badge, and tell the chapter that while the sons of Warsaw were not afraid to meet a bloody death, you are not one of them because you think the spirits are abroad in the town." The boy blushed. "Come," said Thaddeus. "I know you don't mean it. There is someone in trouble. Let us find them quickly." Following the tracks and listening every few steps for the voices, the boys reached the place where Warren and Ivan were imprisoned. They were nearly exhausted from their cramped positions in the long fast. They had called until their throats were parched, and their voices croaked and wheezed. But as they heard the boys' familiar and welcome voices sound faintly through the heavy door, new energy filled them, and they lifted their voices together in a shout that echoed in the vaulted room. It was answered. So thick and close-fitting was the door that they could not make the listeners outside understand anything but the word "help," which, spoken in any language, is certain to bring response. The boys outside shouted assurances which were also not understood, but the sound of friendly voices put now life into Warren and Ivan every moment. The great locked door was baffling, but there was plenty of heavy timbers around, and finding a sort of battering ram was a moment's work. The three went to work with a will. Blow after blow fell on the heavy door. It did not yield an inch. The lock also held firm, but the new casing was built in old and rotten wood. It gave, and with a dusty splintering the door toppled in, and the boys, springing over without a moment's hesitation, entered. They hurried to the exhausted prisoners and cut the ropes and freed them. Both boys were so numb that it was some time before the scouts could rub feeling into the cramped legs and feet. Warren pointed to the floor where the pieces of food were scattered. 3 dead rats lay near. "You were right, Ivan," he said with a great shudder. "What is it?" said the scout who was rubbing him. "Poison," said Warren, "meant for us." A little at a time he told the newcomers the adventures of the past long hours. After the blow on the head, Warren had lain unconscious for so long, and when he finally roused, the darkness and dungeon-like appearance of the room so perplexed him that he thought himself delirious. He was very dizzy, and tried to sleep, feeling that if he could lose himself, he would wake and find the whole thing a bad dream. Even when his sister came and caressed him, he did not change his mind. But finally full consciousness came, and with all the suffering of his hurts, as well as the dreadful anxiety about Eleanor and Rika and the seeming hopelessness of escape. The boys all shook their heads when Ivan broke in to tell how he had given up the great ruby, only to be thought a thief. They listened breathlessly when he told of the strange whisper that came so clearly to his ears, and when they reached the account of the poison they scarcely breathed. "You couldn't see the rats, could you?" Warren asked Ivan. "No," said Ivan. "Well," said Warren, "it queered me, so I thought I wouldn't say anything about it. After you threw the food off the table, I looked down, and presently something slipped out of the shadow. It was the biggest rat you ever saw, much bigger than any of those. He walked around bold as anything, and I began to think what a big fellow like that could do if a fellow got down and out. Well, it made me cold. Then he went off, and I think he told a lot of the others that there was a lot of good eats on the floor, and 6 of them came along and went after that meat and stuff, and when they ate it, one by one, they just went staggering around for a little while as though they didn't know what ailed them, and then they fell down, and I never hoped to see such agony. It was back of you, Ivan, and I thought there was no use telling you, but it is all over now, for the rats and for us too, and we can be glad you fellows found us. As soon as we can walk," he ended, "we must take this thing to headquarters. We know where to look for the girls, and they must help." The largest scout laughed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You can't get help from anyone. Our people, the people of Warsaw, are so scattered that it is the same as though they did not exist. As for the others, the enemy, they laugh. I know of one lady who lost a child, but that there is no use to talk. Whatever is done, we will have to do it ourselves. We will go down ourselves. Now we know where to look, and we will take the children. We are strong. If it comes to a fight, we can get them away. We ourselves will rescue the children." He laughed and helped Warren to his feet. "We are scouts," he said. "It is a good thing we are," said another boy, busy rubbing Ivan, who lay with set teeth, stifling the pain of returning circulation in his tortured ankles. "You did a wonderful thing, Warren," he continued, addressing the boy he named, "when you started the Boy Scout movement over here. Well, I remember the day I told my people about it. They were amused. They called it one of the crazy plans of the Americans. They were afraid to have me join. They were afraid that I would get into trouble with the government. Everything is so strictly watched. But they were so glad to have me have a good chance to learn the American language that they would not quite forbid me. I thought I never would learn. Sometimes I thought I knew it well, and there would appear in your speech some strange words that you could not seem to translate to us, and you called it all with one word, slang. You said you could not get along without it, and it was and is the most difficult part of all of the noble language. Yet now that I can read your native language, I never seem able to find this slang you talk in the books or magazines. I have kept a careful list of all I have heard you say, and I am teaching it to my mother and to my sister, who is to have been presented at court had not this war come up. It would be fine for them to be able to talk this slang to your ambassador. He stopped speaking Polish and broke into lame and halting English. Do you get me, Lissy? He asked. Warren groaned. For the love of Mike, he said. No, I don't mean that. For Pete's sake, he groaned again. I don't know what I mean, he said, but I do get you. Mikhailovo and you don't want to teach your precious family any more gems. He hastily sought an excuse. You see, only men and boys talk it as a general thing. Better teach the women stuff out of the books. All right, said the earnest student of the American language, but in all other things the Boy Scouts are all right for my family. When the books and other things came from your country, I showed them to my father with trembling, but he approved. And now we will do all the great things, we ourselves, that our poor country cannot do. We will help your good father and rescue the little children. One thing I have noticed, said the first boy, there are no boys around the streets giving any help to the hurt or lost or troubled except the Boy Scouts. When Warren rises again, there will be a great order here, and all the boys in the city shall have a chance to prepare for it. Gee whiz, yes, said the student of slang solemnly. We will get 'em all in line. End of chapter 6. Recording by Felix Johnson.